The wildlife tracker. The creature dropped from the cave's ceiling with Dave's severed head in its claws, landing 3 feet in front of me with a wet thud that echoed through the darkness. It held Dave's head up like a puppet and made his mouth move while it spoke in his voice. "You missed the blood trail leading east, Ben. Always were sloppy with your tracking." That's when I realized this thing had been wearing Dave's face for the past 2 days, learning everything he knew about me, my methods, my weaknesses, and now it was done pretending to be human. Let me explain how I learned that some predators don't just hunt their prey. They study them. My name is Ben Carpenter, and I've been tracking problem animals for 22 years. Started in Montana hunting wolves that were killing livestock, moved on to bears, mountain lions, anything that crossed the line from wild animal to human threat. I'm not a poacher or a trophy hunter. I'm a problem solver. When something starts killing cattle, attacking hikers, or threatening communities, ranchers and park services call me. Most jobs are straightforward. Track the animal, confirm it's the problem, put it down clean and quick. Predators follow patterns. They're smart. But they're still animals driven by instinct and hunger. But the job in the Kaibab National Forest was different from the moment I got the call. "We've got something killing cattle on the North Range," Sheriff Martinez told me over the phone. "Lost 8 head in 2 weeks. Whatever it is, it's big and it's smart." Bear? That's what we thought initially. But the kills are strange, clean, almost surgical. And it's only taking choice cuts, leaving the rest. That got my attention. Bears are messy feeders. They tear apart carcasses, eat organs first, leave plenty of evidence. Surgical precision suggested something else entirely. Any tracks? That's the other weird thing. We found prints, but they don't match anything in the books. Too big for a wolf, wrong shape for a bear. State wildlife guy took casts, but he's stumped. I took the job. Good money, interesting challenge. And I had a partner lined up, Dave Mitchell, a tracker I'd worked with on 3 previous hunts. Dave was solid, experienced, knew how to read sign that other people missed. We met at the ranger station 2 days later. Dave looked as puzzled as I felt when Ranger Collins showed us the plaster casts of the tracks. "Jesus," Dave muttered, turning one of the casts in his hands. "What the hell makes a print like this?" The tracks were roughly canine, but wrong in every detail. Too long, with claw marks that suggested retractable talons rather than fixed claws. The pad structure was all off. Too many toes, joints in places that didn't make anatomical sense. "Could be a deformed bear," I suggested, but I didn't believe it. Bears don't develop extra joints, and they sure as hell don't grow retractable claws. "Whatever it is, it's been escalating," Collins said, spreading photos across his desk. "Started with a single cow 3 weeks ago. Now it's hitting multiple animals in one night, and the kills are getting creative." The photos showed what he meant. The first cow had been killed cleanly, throat torn out, choice cuts removed with what looked like surgical precision. But the recent kills were different, more elaborate. The animals had been arranged after death, positioned in ways that seemed almost ritualistic. "It's playing with them," Dave said quietly. "Predators don't do that unless they're learning something." Collins nodded grimly. "That's what worries us. We think it might be getting ready to escalate to human targets." We spent the rest of the day examining the kill sites. The pattern was clear and deeply unsettling. Each attack showed more sophistication than the last. The creature was learning, adapting, refining its techniques. But more disturbing was the evidence that it had been watching the investigation. At the 3rd kill site, I found boot prints in the mud near the fence line. Human boot prints, size 11, leading from the tree line to a position where someone could observe the entire scene. "Dave, look at this." He crouched beside me, studying the prints. Fresh, maybe 6 hours old. But who would be out here? This is private land, middle of nowhere. Dave's expression was troubled. Someone who wanted to watch the response. See how we investigate. That's when I noticed the other tracks. The creature's prints, leading from the kill site to the exact spot where the boot prints began, as if it had followed the human observer, studied them the same way they'd been studying its handiwork. This thing isn't just learning to kill, I realized. It's learning about us. We set up camp that night near the most recent kill site. Standard procedure. Predators often return to feeding areas, especially if they're territorial. We positioned trail cameras at every approach, set motion sensors around the perimeter, and established overlapping fields of fire. Dave took first watch while I caught a few hours of sleep. Professional hunters learn to rest when they can. You never know how long the hunt might last. I woke up to Dave shaking my shoulder. Ben, you need to see this. It was 3:17 a.m. Dave's flashlight illuminated something that made my blood run cold. Our trail cameras had been moved, not destroyed, not triggered, carefully repositioned. Someone or something had adjusted each camera to point inward, toward our camp, instead of outward toward potential approach routes. What the fuck? I whispered. Gets worse, Dave said grimly. He led me to the perimeter motion sensors. Each one had been triggered, but not by something passing through the detection zone. They'd been triggered by something placing objects directly in front of them. Small objects, arranged in neat patterns, bones. Clean, white bones arranged in geometric designs that hurt to look at. Not random animal remains. Carefully selected pieces positioned with artistic precision. It's been watching us sleep, Dave said. For hours. Moving around our camp, studying us, leaving, messages. I checked my watch. We'd been asleep for 4 hours. This thing had spent the entire time circling us, observing our camp setup, our equipment, our defensive positions, learning. We're not hunting it anymore, I realized. It's hunting us. Dave nodded grimly. Question is, what do we do about it? We broke camp at first light, but not to retreat. Professional hunters don't run from difficult quarry. We adapt our tactics. If this thing wanted to study us, we'd use that against it. I set up a false camp 2 miles south, complete with decoy sleeping bags and a cold campfire. Meanwhile, we established our real position on high ground with clear sight lines and multiple escape routes. If it comes back tonight, we'll be ready, I told Dave, but the creature was smarter than we'd anticipated. At sunset, our motion sensors around the false camp triggered. We watched through binoculars as something moved through the decoy site, but it wasn't investigating the sleeping bags or campfire. It was examining our equipment. Through the scope, I could see a figure crouched over our abandoned gear. Humanoid, but wrong in proportions that were hard to define at distance. Too tall, joints that bent in directions that made my eyes water. It knows it's a trap, Dave whispered. It's studying how we set it up. The creature spent 20 minutes at the false camp, handling our equipment, examining our setup with what looked like scientific curiosity. Then, it turned toward our actual position and waved. It knew exactly where we were. Son of a bitch, Dave muttered. How? That's when I realized what we were dealing with. This wasn't just an intelligent predator. It was something that understood human psychology, human tactics, human weaknesses. It had let us think we were hunting it while it learned everything it needed to know about us. The next 2 days were a nightmare of psychological warfare. The creature didn't attack directly. Instead, it demonstrated just how thoroughly it had studied us. It left Dave's coffee mug, stolen from our original camp, balanced on a tree branch exactly where he would notice it during his morning patrol. It arranged my spare ammunition in spelling out words in a language I didn't recognize, but Dave somehow understood. words that made him go pale and refuse to translate. It began mimicking our radio calls, Dave's voice coming from empty forest, giving coordinates that led to nothing but more bone arrangements. "It's breaking us down," Dave said on the third night. "Psychological pressure, making us doubt our senses, our equipment, each other." "Why?" I asked. "If it can do all this, why not just attack?" Dave was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe it's not trying to kill us. Maybe it's trying to recruit us." That's when the radio crackled to life with my own voice. "Dave, I found the trail. Meet me at the cave system. Coordinates 36.5742, 112.1401. Come alone." But I was sitting right next to Dave when the transmission came through. "That's not me," I said. Dave studied my face in the dim light. "I know, but it sounds exactly like you. Inflection, speech patterns, everything. How? It's been listening to us for days. Recording, learning." The radio crackled again. "Dave, where are you?" "I'm waiting at the cave entrance." "Something's wrong with Ben. I think he's been replaced." Now it was Dave's voice, but coming from the same direction as my fake transmission. "It's playing us against each other," Dave realized, making us distrust our own senses. But there was something else, a pattern in the transmissions that suggested more than simple mimicry. The creature wasn't just copying our voices. It was learning to think like us. "We need to end this," I said. "Track it to its lair. Force a confrontation." Dave nodded. "The cave system. It keeps referencing those coordinates. That's where it wants us to go. Then that's where we'll find it." We reached the cave entrance at dawn. The coordinates led to a limestone formation in the deepest part of the forest, riddled with passages that disappeared into absolute darkness, and there were signs that something had been living here for a very long time. The cave mouth was decorated with arrangements of bones, tools, equipment, trophies from previous hunts, human remains mixed with animal carcasses, hunting gear from expeditions that had disappeared over the years. "Jesus Christ," Dave whispered. "How many hunters has this thing killed?" I counted at least 12 different sets of human remains, all arranged with the same artistic precision we'd seen at the kill sites. Each skeleton positioned as if the person had died while hunting, weapons still in hand, eye sockets pointing toward the cave depths. "It's been collecting us," I realized, learning from every hunter that's tried to track it. Dave picked up a rifle from one of the skeletons. A Winchester, 308, professional grade, exactly the same model he carried. "This is Carl Henderson's rifle," he said quietly. "He disappeared up here 3 years ago. Search and rescue never found a trace." I recognized other equipment, backpacks, binoculars, GPS units from hunters who'd vanished over the past decade, all arranged like museum exhibits, preserved and studied. "It doesn't just kill hunters," Dave said. "It learns everything they know, then adds their knowledge to its own." That's when we heard my voice echoing from the cave depths. "Dave, I'm down here. I found something you need to see." But I was standing right next to Dave. "It wants us to follow," Dave said. "Then let's not disappoint it." We entered the cave with weapons ready, flashlights cutting through darkness that seemed to swallow the light. The passage sloped downward, branching into a maze of tunnels that had been carved or widened beyond their natural formation. The walls were covered in markings, not random scratches, but organized information. Maps of the forest, detailed observations of human behavior, anatomical diagrams showing vulnerable points on human and animal bodies. "It's been studying for years," Dave said, his voice barely a whisper. "Learning everything about hunting, tracking, predation." Deeper in the cave, we found what looked like a classroom. Bones arranged to demonstrate hunting techniques, equipment organized to show the evolution of human tracking technology, and in the center, a collection that made my stomach turn. Faces, Human faces, carefully removed and preserved, arranged on wooden stakes like a reference collection, each one labeled with notes in that same alien script we'd seen before. It's been trying to understand us, Dave realized. Not just how we hunt, but how we think, how we communicate, how we look. That's when I heard Dave's voice behind me. "Ben." Turn around slowly, but Dave was right next to me, and his mouth wasn't moving. I spun around to see Dave standing in the cave entrance, except it wasn't quite right. The proportions were off, the movements too fluid, the smile too wide. "Hello, Ben," it said in Dave's voice. "We've been having such an interesting conversation." The real Dave raised his rifle, but the creature moved faster than anything human should be able to move. It flowed across the cave floor like liquid, striking Dave with claws that appeared from nowhere. Dave went down hard, blood spreading across the cave floor. But he was still alive, still breathing. "Don't worry," the creature said, still wearing Dave's face but speaking in a voice that was becoming less human with each word. "I'll take good care of his knowledge. Everything he knows about tracking, about you, about hunting. It'll all be preserved." That's when it shed Dave's appearance like taking off a mask. What stood before me was something that had been human once, maybe, but had been changed by years of feeding on Hunter's knowledge. Too tall, with joints in wrong places, fingers that ended in retractable claws, eyes that reflected light like an animal's. But the worst part was its intelligence. This wasn't a mindless predator. It was something that had been learning, evolving, becoming more than human by consuming human expertise. "You're very good, Ben," it said, circling me in the cave. "Better than most. I've learned so much from watching you work. What are you? I'm what hunters become when they perfect their craft, when they stop hunting animals and start hunting the ultimate prey." It gestured to the bone arrangements, the preserved faces, the collection of human knowledge. "Every hunter who comes here teaches me something new. Carl Henderson showed me long-range shooting. Maria Santos taught me patience. David Kim demonstrated urban tracking techniques. And Dave is teaching me about partnership, about trust, about how humans work together to overcome superior predators." The creature's form shifted, taking on aspects of different hunters it had consumed. Henderson's steady aim, Santos's stealth, Kim's analytical mind. But you, Ben, you're special. You've survived longer than most, adapted faster. You're going to teach me something very valuable. "What's that?" "How to hunt other hunters." It lunged at me with speed that shouldn't have been possible. I dove aside, firing my rifle as I rolled. The bullet caught it in the shoulder, spinning it around, but it recovered instantly. "Impressive reflexes," it said, Dave's blood dripping from its claws. Henderson couldn't move that fast. I fired again, but it was already moving, using the cave's acoustics to mask its position. The creature had learned from years of studying human hunters, and it was using every technique against me. "You can't escape, Ben." Its voice echoed from multiple directions. "I know all your moves. I've been watching you for days, learning your patterns, your preferences, your weaknesses." But it had made one mistake. In studying me so closely, it had revealed its own pattern. The creature was using a combination of every hunting technique it had learned, but that made it predictable to someone who understood those techniques. I waited until it committed to an attack, then used its own momentum against it. As it lunged, I stepped aside and drove my hunting knife into the base of its skull. The creature screamed, a sound that was part human, part animal, part something else entirely. It clawed at the knife, but the blade had severed something crucial. "Impossible," it gasped, collapsing to the cave floor. "I learned everything, every technique, every weakness. You learned how to hunt," I said, keeping my rifle trained on it as it died. "But you never learned when to stop." Dave was still alive when I reached him, though barely. I managed to get him stabilized, radioed for medical evacuation, and waited with him until the helicopter arrived. The cave system was sealed by federal authorities after my report. Officially, it was classified as an unstable geological formation, dangerous to spelunkers and hikers. The bone collections, the preserved faces, the evidence of decades of missing hunters, all of it disappeared into classified files. Dave recovered, though he retired from tracking after the incident. I can't say I blame him. Some experiences change you, make you question whether the hunt is worth the risk. I kept working for another 6 months, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. Every track looked suspicious. Every shadow might hide something studying me, learning my methods, waiting for the right moment to turn the tables. I run a sporting goods store now in Flagstaff. Safe, predictable, no more tracking through dark forests where something might be watching from the trees. But sometimes, late at night when I'm closing up the shop, I get calls on the store phone. Hunters asking for advice about tracking techniques, equipment recommendations, the best methods for hunting dangerous predators. The voices are always familiar. Carl Henderson asking about rifle scopes, Maria Santos wanting to know about camouflage patterns, David Kim inquiring about GPS technology, all of them hunters who disappeared in the Kaibab National Forest over the years, all of them speaking in perfect unison, like they're sharing the same voice. Ben, they say, we've learned so much since you killed our teacher. Would you like to see what we can do now? I always hang up, change my phone number, but the calls keep coming. Because here's what I learned in that cave, what the creature had been trying to teach me all along. Some knowledge doesn't die with its host. Some learning continues even after death. And somewhere out there, in forests where hunters go missing and predators leave tracks that don't match any known animal, that knowledge is still growing, still learning, still hunting. So if you're a tracker, if you hunt dangerous game for a living, if you've ever been hired to solve a problem animal situation that doesn't quite make sense, pay attention to the details. Are you tracking something, or is something tracking you? Are you learning its patterns, or is it learning yours? And, most importantly, when you're setting up camp in the wilderness, alone with your expertise and your confidence, remember that you might not be the apex predator you think you are. Some creatures have been studying hunters a lot longer than hunters have been studying them. And if this story has made you think twice about that tracking job in a remote forest, if you've started wondering what else might be watching from the tree line, hit that like button. Let me know in the comments if you've ever felt like you were being studied while hunting, like something was learning your methods. Subscribe for more stories about predators that don't follow the rules, about the hunters who become the hunted, about the creatures that turn our own expertise against us. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing about being a professional tracker isn't the animals you're hunting. It's what those animals might be learning from watching you work. Sweet dreams. The night photographer. I photograph car accidents for insurance companies, which means I see a lot of dead bodies. But when I developed the film from last Tuesday's 3-car pileup, there was someone standing in the background of every shot. Someone who'd been thrown from the vehicle and died on impact. Someone who was supposed to be lying under the white sheet 20 feet away, but was instead staring directly into my camera with eyes that reflected the flash like an animal's. And in each successive photo, she was getting closer to where I'd been standing. Let me explain how I learned that some cameras don't just capture images, they capture souls. My name is Danny Reeves, and I've been documenting death for 12 years. Insurance fraud investigation. Specifically, when someone claims their car accident injuries are worse than they actually are, I'm the guy who shows up with a camera to prove otherwise. Take photos of the scene, the vehicles, the damage patterns. Show that a 5-mile-per-hour fender bender couldn't possibly cause the spinal injuries they're claiming. It's not glamorous work, but it pays well. Insurance companies will spend $20,000 on investigation to avoid paying out $200,000 in false claims. And I'm good at my job. I notice details other people miss. The way glass breaks, how metal bends, where blood spatters land. My photos have saved insurance companies millions of dollars over the years. Most of the accidents I document are minor: parking lot bumps, intersection collisions, rear-end taps where nobody gets seriously hurt. But sometimes I get called to the big ones. The accidents where people don't walk away, where fire departments need hydraulic tools to extract bodies, where my job is to document not just damage, but death. That's what happened last Tuesday night. 3-car collision on Highway 101, just outside Flagstaff. Drunk driver ran a red light, T-boned a sedan, which spun into oncoming traffic and got hit by a pickup truck. 2 fatalities. The drunk driver and a woman named Sarah Chen who'd been driving home from her nursing shift at the hospital. I got the call at 11:47 p.m. Major accident with fatalities, the dispatcher said. Police need photos for reconstruction, and we need documentation for the claims. Standard procedure. I grabbed my camera bag and drove to the scene. Highway 101 was lit up like a movie set. Fire trucks, ambulances, police cars, all with their emergency lights cutting through the desert darkness. The accident had happened at the intersection near the Walmart, where 4 lanes of traffic converged under sodium vapor streetlights. The damage was extensive. The drunk driver's SUV had folded around a light pole like aluminum foil. The sedan, Sarah's car, was crumpled beyond recognition. The pickup had flipped twice before coming to rest on its roof in the median. Hell of a thing, Officer Martinez said, walking up as I unpacked my equipment. Drunk bastard was doing 70 in a 35 zone. Never even hit the brakes. Fatalities? 2. Driver of the SUV died on impact. Woman in the sedan. Took the paramedics 20 minutes to extract her, but she was already gone. I nodded, attaching my flash unit to the camera. It was a vintage Nikon F3 that I'd bought at an estate sale 3 months earlier. The previous owner had been a photographer named Marcus Webb, who'd specialized in crime scene documentation before he disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The camera came with a set of specialized lenses and custom film processing equipment that produced incredibly sharp, detailed images. The seller, Marcus's nephew, had been eager to get rid of everything. Uncle Marcus was obsessed with that camera, he'd said, always talking about how it could capture things other cameras couldn't. Gave me the creeps, to be honest, but the image quality was undeniable. My accident photos had never been clearer, more detailed, more useful for reconstruction purposes. The insurance company had actually given me a bonus after seeing the quality improvement. I spent 2 hours documenting the scene. Wide shots of the overall accident pattern, close-ups of impact damage, detail shots of skid marks, debris patterns, vehicle positions. The camera worked flawlessly, as it always did. Each flash illuminated the scene with perfect clarity, capturing every relevant detail. The bodies had already been removed by the time I arrived, standard procedure for fatality accidents. The coroner's van was pulling away as I started shooting, but I could see the chalk outlines, the blood stains, the evidence of where people had died. Sarah Chen had been thrown from her vehicle during the second impact. According to the police report, she'd landed 30 feet from the car, suffering massive internal injuries, dead before the paramedics arrived. I photographed everything: the impact points, the trajectory patterns, the final resting positions of all 3 vehicles. Professional, thorough, documented with the cold precision that insurance companies required. It wasn't until I developed the film 2 days later that I discovered the woman in the background. I use a traditional darkroom setup in my basement, one of the few photographers who still develops film manually. Digital photography is fine for most work, But film captures details that digital sensors miss. Grain structure, light diffusion, shadow gradients. Insurance work requires that level of precision. The first photo looked normal. Wide shot of the accident scene, all 3 vehicles visible. Emergency lighting casting harsh shadows across the asphalt. Standard documentation photo, but there was something in the background. A figure standing near the median, just outside the main light pool. At first glance, it looked like a bystander or emergency responder, but when I looked closer, it was a woman. Asian features, shoulder-length black hair, wearing what looked like medical scrubs. She was standing exactly where Sarah Chen's body had been found, staring directly at the camera with an expression I couldn't quite read, but that was impossible. Sarah Chen had been dead for 6 hours when I took that photo, and the police had already removed all bystanders from the scene. I checked the next photo, a closer shot of the sedan's impact damage. The woman was there again, but closer, much closer. Now she was standing just behind the crumpled vehicle, still staring at the camera, still wearing those medical scrubs that were now clearly stained with blood. Photo 3 showed the SUV's driver's side impact. The woman was even closer, maybe 20 feet from where I'd been standing. Her face was clearer now, and I could see details that made my hands shake as I held the print. Her skin was gray, not pale, but actually gray, like old concrete. Her eyes reflected the camera flash like an animal's, creating 2 bright points of light in otherwise dead sockets. And her mouth was open, as if she was trying to say something. Photo 4. She was 10 feet away. Photo 5. 5 feet. Photo 6. Standing right next to where I'd been positioned. Close enough that I should have seen her when I took the shot. Close enough that she could have reached out and touched me. But I'd been alone at that accident scene. Completely alone. Except for the police officers who were all accounted for in the background of my shots. I spread all 23 photos across my darkroom table, arranging them in chronological order. The pattern was clear and terrifying. In every single photo, Sarah Chen's ghost was visible, moving closer to my position with each successive shot. But here's what really fucked me up. In the last photo, she wasn't looking at the camera anymore. She was looking past it, as if she could see me in my darkroom 2 days later, developing the images that had captured her spirit. I called Officer Martinez the next morning. "Danny, what can I do for you? The accident on Tuesday night. The woman who died? Sarah Chen. What was she wearing? Wearing Jesus, Danny? Why do you want to know that? Just professional curiosity." For the report, Martinez was quiet for a moment. Hospital scrubs. She'd just gotten off shift at Flagstaff General. Blue scrubs, if I remember right. Why? Blue scrubs? Just like the woman in my photos. Martinez, were there any other people at the scene when I was taking pictures? Any medical personnel? Bystanders? Anyone I might have missed? Hell no. We had the area locked down tight. No one inside the perimeter except police and fire. You know that. I hung up and stared at the photos spread across my kitchen table. 23 images of an accident scene, and in every one, a dead woman was getting closer to my camera. That's when I noticed something else. Something that made me grab a magnifying glass to be sure. In the final photo, there was another figure in the background. A man with a camera, standing in the shadows beyond the emergency lights. He was too far away to make out clearly, but I could see he was photographing the scene, just like I had been. But there hadn't been any other photographers at that accident. I spent the rest of the day going through my files, pulling out photos from previous accident scenes. Major collisions, fatality accidents, cases where people had died. I'd documented dozens of them over the years, but I'd never looked for this. What I found made me understand that my camera wasn't just capturing accidents. It was capturing the dead. Photo after photo, accident after accident. There they were. Ghostly figures standing in backgrounds, sitting in damaged vehicles, walking through scenes where they died, always looking directly at the camera, always aware they were being photographed. A motorcycle accident from 6 months ago. The rider was visible in 3 shots, standing beside his mangled bike despite having been pronounced dead at the scene. A head-on collision from last winter. Both drivers appeared in the background of my photos, despite their bodies being removed hours earlier. A single-car rollover from 2 weeks ago. The driver was sitting in the passenger seat of his destroyed vehicle, staring at me through the camera lens with eyes that reflected the flash like mirrors. They were all there. Every person who died in every accident I'd photographed. All captured by my camera. All aware of being watched. All trying to communicate something I couldn't understand. But Sarah Chen was different. Sarah Chen was getting closer. I decided to return to the accident site that night. If Sarah's spirit was somehow connected to that location, maybe I could find answers. Maybe I could understand what she was trying to tell me. Highway 101 at midnight was empty except for the occasional semi-truck hauling freight between Phoenix and Las Vegas. The intersection where the accident had happened was back to normal. Traffic lights functioning, debris cleared. No evidence of the violence that had occurred there 3 days earlier. I parked in the Walmart lot and walked to the median where Sarah's body had been found. The asphalt was stained with something dark that the cleanup crews hadn't been able to remove completely. Motor oil, transmission fluid, brake fluid, and blood. I set up my camera and started taking photos. Wide shots of the intersection, detail shots of the impact points, documentation of how the scene looked now versus how it had looked during the accident. Through the viewfinder, everything looked normal. Empty road, street lights, the usual detritus of suburban commerce. But when I developed those photos the next morning, Sarah was in every single one, not in the background this time. Front and center, standing directly in front of my camera, close enough that I should have been able to reach out and touch her. Her face was clear, detailed, unmistakably the same woman from the hospital ID photo I'd found in the police report. But she looked wrong. Her skin had that same gray pallor. Her eyes reflected light like glass, and her medical scrubs were torn and blood-stained from the accident. Most disturbing of all, her mouth was moving as if she was trying to speak, trying to warn me about something. In the final photo, she was pointing behind me. I turned around to look at what she was indicating, but there was nothing there. Just the empty Walmart parking lot, a few abandoned shopping carts, the distant glow of the store's security lighting. That's when I noticed the other figure in the photo's background. The man with the camera, the same one I'd seen in the original accident photos. But now he was much closer, standing maybe 50 feet away in the Walmart parking lot, and I could see his face clearly for the first time. It was Marcus Webb, the previous owner of my camera, the photographer who'd supposedly disappeared under mysterious circumstances. But Marcus looked wrong, too. His skin had the same gray pallor as Sarah's. His eyes reflected light in the same unnatural way, and he was smiling at me through the camera lens with an expression that was anything but friendly. I drove home at 90 miles per hour, constantly checking my rearview mirror for headlights that might be following. But the highway remained empty, and I made it back to my house without incident. That night, I researched Marcus Webb. What I found explained everything and made it so much worse. Marcus had been a crime scene photographer for 15 years before his disappearance. Police work, insurance investigation, accident reconstruction, the same kind of work I did. But according to the articles I found, Marcus had become obsessed with something he called death photography. His colleagues reported that Marcus claimed his camera could capture spiritual residue at scenes of violent death, He believed that people who died traumatically left psychic imprints that could be photographed under the right conditions. Most people dismissed it as the ravings of someone who'd seen too much death. But Marcus kept talking about it, kept insisting that his photos showed evidence of life after death. Then he started behaving strangely, showing up at accident scenes uninvited, taking photos of crime scenes he wasn't authorized to document, following ambulances and fire trucks to places where people had died. The last report I could find was from 18 months ago. Marcus had been arrested for trespassing at a multiple fatality accident on Interstate 40. He'd been found photographing the scene at 3 a.m., 12 hours after the bodies had been removed. When police questioned him, he claimed he was documenting the spiritual migration. He disappeared from custody that same night, walked out of the holding cell without anyone seeing him leave. Security cameras showed him entering the cell, but never showed him leaving. He'd simply vanished, and now he was using my camera to continue his work. I should have destroyed the camera right then, should have smashed it with a hammer, burned the film, thrown everything in a dumpster and walked away. But I needed proof, evidence of what was happening, documentation that would make people believe. So I did the stupidest thing possible. I went looking for Marcus. I started visiting other accident scenes where I'd photographed deaths, places where my camera had captured ghostly figures, where the dead had been documented alongside the damage. If Marcus was somehow connected to these locations, maybe I could find him at one of them. The motorcycle accident site was first. A curve on Highway 89 where a rider had hit loose gravel and gone over the guardrail. I'd photographed the scene 2 weeks earlier, capturing both the wreckage and the rider's spirit standing beside his mangled bike. I arrived at sunset, when the light was similar to what it had been during the original accident. Set up my camera and started shooting. The motorcycle rider was there immediately, not in the background this time, but standing directly in front of me, close enough that I could see the road rash on his arms, the compound fracture in his leg, the place where his helmet had cracked open during impact. But he wasn't alone. There were others, dozens of them, standing along the roadside like a ghostly audience, all watching me through my camera lens. All the people who died in accidents I'd photographed over the past 3 months, all somehow connected to my work, my documentation of their deaths, and standing among them, directing them like a conductor directing an orchestra, was Marcus Webb. He looked exactly as he had in the Walmart parking lot photo, but now I could see him without the camera's mediation. Gray skin, reflective eyes, that predatory smile that suggested he'd been waiting for this moment. "Danny," he said, his voice carrying across the desert air like an echo from a deep well. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The camera felt like it weighed 100 pounds, dragging me down, keeping me rooted to that spot on the highway. "The camera chooses its photographers," Marcus continued, walking closer. "I thought I was chosen to document death. Turned out I was chosen to collect it. What do you want? To finish my work. Each accident you photograph, each death you document. Their souls get trapped in the film, captured in that moment between life and death, unable to move on." I looked around at the ghostly figures surrounding us. Sarah Chen was among them, still wearing her blood-stained scrubs, still trying to warn me about something. All of them trapped, all of them unable to rest. Why? Marcus's smile widened, revealing teeth that had gone black with decay. Because death is the only truth worth documenting. Everything else is just temporary. But death is permanent. Death is honest. Death is real. Let them go. Can't do that, Danny. They're my collection now. My gallery of final moments. And you. He raised his own camera, an identical Nikon Free that gleamed with malevolent purpose. "You're going to be my masterpiece." The camera flash went off like lightning. I felt something tear loose inside me, like a piece of my soul being ripped away and pulled into Marcus's lens. The world became gray and distant, sounds muffled, colors drained of life, but I wasn't dead yet. Not completely. I stumbled backward, clutching my camera like a weapon. Marcus laughed, preparing for another shot. "One more flash should do it," he said. "Then you can join my collection permanently." That's when Sarah Chen stepped between us, her ghostly form solidified, becoming more real than anything else in that desert landscape. She looked at me with eyes that still held compassion despite being dead for a week. "The film," she whispered, her voice like wind through empty spaces. "Destroy the film." I understood. The souls weren't trapped in the camera itself. They were trapped in the photographs. Every image I developed, every picture that showed their ghostly forms, was a prison holding them in this world. I yanked open the camera's back, exposing the film to the dying sunlight. Marcus screamed, a sound like metal tearing, as his collection began to dissolve, but he wasn't finished. He raised his camera for one final shot, the flash charging with energy that made the air itself vibrate. I did the only thing I could think of. I threw my camera at him as hard as I could. The two cameras collided in midair with a sound like thunder. Glass shattered, metal twisted, and both devices exploded in a shower of sparks and supernatural energy. The effect was immediate. Every ghostly figure on that highway began to glow with warm, white light. Sarah smiled at me one last time before dissolving into particles of luminance that rose into the desert sky like reverse snow. Marcus tried to grab the fragments of his camera, but his hands passed right through them. Without the device binding the souls to his will, he had no power over them, and without their trapped energy sustaining him, he began to fade like morning mist. "This isn't over," he whispered as his form became translucent. "There are other cameras, other photographers. Death always finds a way to document itself." Then he was gone, leaving me alone on an empty highway with the wreckage of 2 supernatural cameras and the knowledge that I'd freed dozens of trapped souls. I walked back to my car and drove home in silence. No more ghost photography for me. No more documenting death for insurance companies. Some jobs aren't worth the price they demand. I work for a wedding photographer now, capturing moments of joy instead of tragedy, documenting life instead of death. It's not as well paid, but it's honest work that doesn't require me to stare into the abyss of human mortality. But sometimes, late at night when I'm developing film in my darkroom, I think I see familiar faces in the grain. Sarah Chen smiling in a bride's bouquet, Marcus Webb lurking in the shadows of a reception hall. Reminders that death is always watching, always waiting for someone to document its work. And sometimes I wonder about other photographers out there, working crime scenes and accident sites with cameras that seem too good to be true. Cameras purchased at estate sales from previous owners who disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Because Marcus was right about one thing. Death always finds a way to document itself. And somewhere out there, another photographer is probably discovering that their camera captures more than just images. So here's what I need you to understand. If you work with cameras, if you document tragedy for a living, if you've ever bought equipment from someone who seemed eager to get rid of it, pay attention to your photographs. Really look at them. Because if you start seeing faces in the background, figures that shouldn't be there, people staring at your camera with eyes that reflect the flash like animals, you might want to consider a career change. Some images are better left uncaptured, some moments are better left undocumented, and some cameras are better left in the dark rooms of the dead. And if this story has made you look twice at the background of your own photos, if you've started wondering what else might be hiding in the shadows of your images, hit that like button. Let me know in the comments if you've ever seen something in a photograph that shouldn't have been there. Subscribe for more stories about the price of documentation, about the things that hide just outside the frame, about the cameras that capture more than they should. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing about photography isn't what you see through the viewfinder. It's what sees you back. Sweet dreams. The home inspector. I was 3 steps into the house when the voices started calling from the basement. "We've been waiting for you, Mr. Sullivan. Come downstairs. Dinner's getting cold." 13 different voices, all speaking in perfect unison, all belonging to people who'd been dead for decades. The front door had already locked behind me with a sound like breaking bones, and when I spun around to escape, I could see rotting faces pressed against every window, smiling at me with black teeth and hungry eyes. Let me explain how I learned that some houses don't just need inspection, they need to be fed. My name is Mike Sullivan, and I've been inspecting houses for 18 years. Started right out of college with a degree in structural engineering and a certification in residential safety. I've crawled through more basements, attics, and crawl spaces than I can count. Checked foundations, electrical systems, plumbing, HVAC. If it can break, leak, or burn down a house, I've seen it. Most inspections are routine. Check the checklist, write the report, collect the fee. Buyers want to know what they're getting into. Sellers want to prove their house won't collapse the day after closing. Simple business transaction, but 1247 Maple Street was different from the moment I pulled into the driveway. The house was a Victorian-era beauty, 3 stories of intricate woodwork and stained glass windows that should have been worth $500,000 in today's market. But it had been listed at $180,000 for 3 years without a single offer. That should have been my first red flag. The real estate agent, Jenny Morrison, met me at the curb, mid-40s, nervous energy, constantly checking her watch like she had somewhere else to be. "Thanks for coming out, Mike," she said, handing me the keys. "I know it's short notice. No problem. Though I have to ask, why's this place been on the market so long? It's gorgeous." Jenny's smile flickered. "Oh, you know how it is. Some houses just take time to find the right buyer. Any particular issues I should know about? Foundation problems? Electrical? Plumbing? Nothing like that. The structure's solid. Just, well, you'll see. I'll let you work. Call me when you're finished." She was back in her car and driving away before I could ask any follow-up questions. In 18 years of doing this job, I'd never had an agent bail that fast. The house loomed over me as I approached the front porch. Beautiful craftsmanship, but something about the proportions felt wrong. The windows were too dark, the shadows too deep, the silence too complete. Even the birds seemed to avoid the place. No chirping. No movement in the massive oak trees surrounding the property. I pulled out my inspection clipboard and started with the exterior. Foundation looked solid, no obvious settling or water damage. Siding was in good condition, gutters clean, roof in decent shape. Everything appeared normal from the outside. But when I inserted the key into the front door lock, it turned with a sound like grinding bones. The door swung open on its own, revealing a foyer that stretched back into shadows too deep for midday sunlight to penetrate. The air that wafted out was cold and stale, carrying scents of old wood, dust, and something else. Something organic and unpleasant. That's when I heard them. Muffled voices coming from somewhere below. Conversational murmur, like people having dinner in a distant room. But that was impossible. The house was supposed to be empty. I called out. "Hello? Anyone home?" The voices stopped instantly. Complete silence, like someone had hit a mute button on a television. I stepped across the threshold, and that's when everything went wrong. The front door slammed shut behind me with enough force to rattle the windows. I spun around and grabbed the handle, but it wouldn't turn. The deadbolt had engaged, but I hadn't locked it, and the keyhole on the inside was gone. Just smooth brass where the lock mechanism should have been. What the hell? I pulled out my phone to call Jenny, but the screen showed no signal. Not unusual in old houses with thick walls, but combined with the locked door, it was starting to feel like more than coincidence. That's when the voices started again. Clearer now, coming from directly beneath my feet. "We've been waiting for you, Mr. Sullivan." My blood went cold. They knew my name. "Come downstairs. Dinner's getting cold." 13 different voices speaking in perfect synchronization. Men, women, children, all with the same hollow quality, like sound echoing up from the bottom of a well. I backed away from the basement door at the end of the hallway, but movement outside caught my eye. Through the living room windows, I could see faces pressed against the glass. Pale, gaunt faces with sunken eyes and smiles that stretched too wide. Some looked fresh, recently dead. Others were little more than skulls with bits of flesh clinging to bone. They were watching me, waiting. I tried every window on the ground floor, but they were all sealed shut, not painted over or swollen with humidity. Sealed. Like someone had welded them closed from the inside. My flashlight revealed that the window frames had been filled with some kind of dark, sticky substance that looked organic. The voices from the basement were getting louder, more insistent. "Mr. Sullivan, please. We've prepared such a lovely meal. The inspection can wait. Come join us first. We've been so lonely, without proper company." I had two choices. Stay on the ground floor and slowly go insane listening to those voices, or go downstairs and confront whatever was calling my name. Professional curiosity won out over common sense. After 18 years of home inspection, I'd seen everything from structural collapse to toxic mold. Whatever was in that basement, it was probably just another problem to document and solve. I was wrong about that. Very wrong. The basement stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into darkness that seemed to swallow my flashlight beam. The air grew colder with each step, and that organic smell got stronger, like meat that had been left out too long. At the bottom of the stairs, my flashlight revealed an impossible scene. The basement had been converted into a formal dining room. A massive wooden table stretched across the space, set with fine china, crystal glasses, and silver cutlery that gleamed in my flashlight beam. 13 chairs surrounded the table, each one occupied. The families sitting around that table had been dead for decades. At the head sat a man in a 1950s business suit, his face gray and sunken, but his posture perfectly upright. To his right, a woman in a floral dress, her hair still styled in victory rolls despite the fact that her scalp was visible through patches where the hair had fallen out. 3 children sat beside her, all in clothing from different eras. A boy in knickers and suspenders from the 1940s. A girl in a poodle skirt from the 1950s. A teenager in bell-bottoms from the 1970s. None of them belonged to the same family, but they sat together like they'd been sharing meals for eternity. As my flashlight swept around the table, more faces became visible. A young couple from the 1980s, still holding hands. An elderly man in overalls who looked like he died during the Depression. A woman with an infant in her arms, both of them perfectly preserved but unmistakably dead. They all turned to look at me as my light hit their faces, moving in perfect unison like synchronized swimmers. Their eyes reflected the flashlight beam like animals' eyes, creating 13 points of light in the darkness. "Mr. Sullivan," they said in unison, their voices a chorus of decay. "So good of you to join us. Please, sit. We've saved you a place." There was an empty chair at the foot of the table, a place setting already laid out with my name written in elegant script on a small card. That's when I ran. I bolted up the basement stairs, taking them 3 at a time. But when I reached the ground floor, the layout had changed. The hallway was longer now, stretching back into shadows that my flashlight couldn't penetrate. The doors were in different positions, and there were more of them than there had been before. The house was rearranging itself. "Mr. Sullivan," the voices called from behind me. That was very rude. We prepared such a lovely dinner. I could hear footsteps on the basement stairs. Slow, deliberate. The sound of 13 people climbing toward me in perfect formation. I tried the first door on my right. It opened into what should have been a coat closet but was now a fully furnished kitchen from the 1950s. A woman stood at the stove, her back to me, stirring something in a large pot. She was humming a tune I didn't recognize. "Excuse me," I said. "I need to get out of here." She turned around, and I saw that half her face was missing, burned away, leaving exposed bone and teeth. But she smiled at me with the half that remained. "Oh, you must be the inspector," she said in a voice like rustling leaves. "I'm making dinner for my family. We're having pot roast. Would you like to stay?" The pot she was stirring was full of something thick and dark that didn't look like any roast I'd ever seen. And the smell. I slammed the door and tried the next one. This opened into a living room from the 1960s, complete with wood paneling and shag carpet. A family was gathered around an old television set, watching static. Father in his easy chair, mother on the sofa, 2 children on the floor. All of them perfectly still, perfectly silent. "Hello?" I called out. They turned to look at me in unison, and I saw that their eyes were gone. Just empty sockets that seemed to go back forever into darkness. "Would you like to watch television with us?" the father asked. "We've been watching the same program for 40 years. It's very entertaining." I backed out and tried another door. Each room told the same story. Families from different decades, all perfectly preserved in the moment of their death, all inviting me to join them in whatever final activity they'd been engaged in when the house claimed them. A 1970s family playing board games with dice that only showed 1s and 6s. A 1980s family opening Christmas presents that contained nothing but dust and bone fragments. A 1990s family singing happy birthday to a child whose cake was covered in maggots instead of candles. All of them dead. All of them trapped. All of them trying to lure me into their eternal routines. But the worst was the master bedroom. I opened the door to find a young couple in their wedding clothes, lying on a bed covered in rose petals that had long since turned black and brittle. They were holding hands, their faces peaceful, like they died in their sleep. "We were so happy," the bride whispered without opening her eyes. "Our first night in our new home. We fell asleep and just never woke up. The house gave us such beautiful dreams," the groom added. "We dreamed we lived here forever, raised our children here, grew old here. We dreamed of family dinners every Sunday, holiday celebrations, birthday parties. But dreams aren't enough," the bride continued. "The house needs real families, living families, families with love to feed on." Hell, that's when I understood. The house wasn't just killing these families, it was feeding on them, on their love, their bonds, their shared experiences. And it had been doing it for decades. "How many?" I asked. 13 families so far," the groom said. "We were the first, in 1953. The house was so hungry then, so empty, but each family makes it stronger. And now it wants a new family," the bride added. "It wants you to bring them here, to inspect the house and certify it as safe, to recommend it to buyers with children." I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. The dinner party from the basement was coming to find me. "Don't let it use you," the bride whispered urgently. "Don't let it add more families to its collection." The footsteps stopped outside the bedroom door. I could hear breathing on the other side. 13 people breathing in perfect synchronization. "Mr. Sullivan," they called in unison. "We know you're in there. Come out, please." We need to discuss your inspection report." I looked around the room for another exit. There was a window, but when I tried to open it, I found it was sealed like all the others. But next to it was a small door I hadn't noticed before. It was barely 3 feet high, painted the same color as the wall. I opened it and found myself looking into a narrow crawl space that ran between the walls. It was barely wide enough for a person, but it might lead to another part of the house. "Mr. Sullivan," the voices were getting impatient. "Don't make us come in there." I squeezed into the crawl space just as the bedroom door burst open. Through the wall, I could hear them searching the room, their voices becoming angry when they realized I was gone. The crawl space was a maze of narrow passages that seemed to run throughout the entire house. I followed one that angled downward, hoping it would lead me to the foundation where I might find another way out. Instead, it led me to the heart of the house. I emerged into a small room that shouldn't have existed according to any architectural logic. It was circular, with walls made of the same dark, organic substance I'd seen sealing the windows. And in the center was a massive tree, not a normal tree. This thing was ancient, its trunk easily 10 feet in diameter, its bark black and twisted like burned flesh. Its roots extended in all directions, disappearing into the walls, the floor, the ceiling. They pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm like a heartbeat, and hanging from its branches like fruit were photographs. Hundreds of them, pictures of families at dinner tables, children blowing out birthday candles, couples on their wedding days, grandparents holding babies, all the moments the house had fed on, all the love it had consumed. At the base of the tree was a small plaque, tarnished with age but still readable. "The Whitmore Family Home, Est 1953, where love lives forever." The Whitmore family, the couple in the master bedroom. This had been their house originally, and somehow their love for it had twisted into something hungry and predatory. I heard sounds from the crawl space behind me. They'd found my trail. "Mr. Sullivan," the voices called, echoing through the narrow passages. "You can't hide from us forever. The house wants you to complete your inspection." I looked around the room for anything I could use as a weapon or tool. That's when I noticed something about the tree's root system. The roots weren't just growing randomly. They were following the house's original gas lines. In 1953, most homes used natural gas for heating and cooking. If the tree had grown into those lines, if it was somehow using them to feed, I pulled out my inspection tools. Every home inspector carries a gas detector, and mine was beeping frantically. The room was full of natural gas, probably had been for decades. The tree was feeding on it, using it to power whatever supernatural process kept the families alive and trapped. "Mr. Sullivan." The voices were closer now. Come out, wherever you are." I found what I was looking for near the tree's base. The original gas shutoff valve for the entire house. It was ancient, probably hadn't been turned in 70 years, but it was still functional. The voices were right outside the room now. "We can smell you in there, Mr. Sullivan. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I grabbed the gas valve with both hands and turned it with every ounce of strength I had. It fought me, rust and corrosion making it nearly impossible to move. But finally it gave way with a loud crack. The effect was immediate. The tree began to shudder, its leaves rustling without any wind. The photographs hanging from its branches started to fade, the happy family moments dissolving like they'd been printed on water. And from throughout the house, I heard screaming, 13 voices crying out in pain and rage as the energy that had sustained them for decades was suddenly cut off. The voices became distorted, electronic, like a radio losing its signal. "What have you done?" they wailed. "What have you done?" The tree was dying. Its bark began to crack and peel, revealing something pale and writhing underneath. The roots were withdrawing from the walls, and I could hear the house itself groaning as its supernatural support system collapsed. I had maybe minutes before the whole structure came down. I crawled back through the passages as fast as I could, following them upward toward the ground floor. Behind me, I could hear the tree crashing down, taking part of the house's foundation with it. When I emerged into the main hallway, everything was chaos. The walls were shifting, rooms rearranging themselves, doors appearing and disappearing. The house was dying, and it was taking its impossible geometry with it. But the front door was visible now, and the lock mechanism had reappeared. I ran for it, dodging falling ceiling tiles and collapsing door frames. The 13 families were there, standing in my path, but they were fading like morning mist, becoming translucent, losing cohesion. "You've doomed us all," the 1950s businessman said, his voice barely a whisper. "We'll have no peace now, no rest." "You were never at peace," I said, pushing through them toward the door. "You were prisoners." "But we were together," the bride from the master bedroom said, tears of black liquid running down her translucent cheeks. "We were a family." The key turned easily in the lock, and the door swung open to reveal blessed daylight. I stumbled out onto the porch as the house collapsed behind me, its impossible rooms folding in on themselves like a house of cards. By the time the dust settled, there was nothing left but a pile of old wood and broken stone. And scattered among the debris, I could see dozens of photographs. Real family photos from real families who'd lived and loved and died in that house over the decades. But they were just pictures now. Normal photographs of normal people who'd finally been allowed to rest. I called the fire department from my car, told them there'd been a gas explosion at 1247 Maple Street. They arrived to find exactly what I'd described. An old house destroyed by a gas leak, probably caused by roots growing into the original lines. No bodies were found in the debris. According to official records, the house had been empty for years. Jenny Morrison's real estate license had expired in 1987. The woman who'd hired me didn't exist, or hadn't existed for a very long time. I quit home inspection the next week. Couldn't bring myself to enter another house, to check another basement, to crawl through another narrow space where something might be waiting. I work for a construction company now, building new houses instead of inspecting old ones. It's honest work with no dark history, no trapped families, no hungry spirits lurking in crawl spaces. But sometimes, when I'm framing a new foundation or running electrical through fresh walls, I think about what I learned in that house on Maple Street. Some houses aren't just buildings. They're living things with needs and appetites, and they'll do whatever it takes to feed those hungers, even if it means trapping innocent families in eternal dinner parties where the love never stops flowing and the meal never ends. So here's what I need you to understand. If you're house hunting, if you're looking for that perfect family home at a price that seems too good to be true, pay attention to the details. How long has it been on the market? Why are the previous owners so eager to sell? Does the real estate agent seem nervous, reluctant to stay inside for long? And most importantly, listen to the house itself. Does it feel like a home? Or does it feel hungry? Because some houses want more than just occupants. Some houses want families they can keep forever, feeding on their love until there's nothing left but echoes of laughter from rooms that should be empty. If this story has made you think twice about that perfect house you've been considering, if you've started paying attention to how long properties have been on the market and why, hit that like button. Let me know in the comments if you've ever been in a house that felt alive, that seemed to watch you move through its rooms. Subscribe for more stories about the things that hide in plain sight, about the prices we pay for the American dream, about the homes that choose their families instead of the other way around. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing about house hunting isn't the mortgage payments, it's what the house might be hunting for in return. Sweet dreams. The Night Shift, the The dead security guard was still making his rounds. I found his body in the basement 3 days ago. Heart attack. Slumped over his desk. Already cold. But every night at 2 a.m., I can hear his keys jingling in the empty hallways above me. The footsteps are heavy, deliberate, following the exact same patrol route he'd walked for 15 years. Last night, I finally got the courage to check the security monitors, and there he was, clear as day, nodding at camera 7 like he always did, his face gray and sunken, but still doing his job. Let me explain how I discovered that some people are so dedicated to their work, they refuse to let death clock them out. My name is Jake Torres, and I'm a night security guard at Meridian Corporate Center. 23 floors of glass and steel in downtown Phoenix, housing the kind of boring companies that make the world go round. Insurance firms, accounting offices, legal practices. Nothing exciting ever happens here, which is exactly why I took the job. I'd been working security for 8 years, bouncing between different sites, mall cop, hospital security, construction sites, all the glamorous positions that pay just enough to keep you broke. But Meridian was different. Union job, good benefits, and most importantly, it was quiet. Just me, empty hallways, and 12 hours of peace. The day shift guard was Harold Kowalski, 62 years old, been working security longer than I'd been alive. Harold was old school, pressed uniform, spit-shined boots, and this obsessive attention to detail that bordered on religious devotion. Harold had rules, lots of rules. Every door gets checked twice. He told me during my first week. Every light switch has to be in the same position when you leave as when you arrived. Every coffee cup gets washed and put back exactly where you found it. His massive ring of keys jingled when he walked. Had to be 50 keys on that ring, each one labeled with Harold's meticulous handwriting. The sound echoed through the building like a metal heartbeat, and honestly, it was comforting. You always knew where Harold was. "This building has a soul, Jake," he said, tapping the marble wall of the lobby. "Treat it with respect, follow the procedures, and it'll take care of you. But if you get sloppy..." He shook his head. "Buildings remember disrespect, and they don't forgive." Harold never missed a day, never called in sick, never showed up late. In 15 years, he'd taken exactly 12 vacation days, and only because his wife threatened divorce. The man lived and breathed this job, which is why finding him dead felt like discovering that gravity had stopped working. It happened on a Tuesday. I was running late. My piece of shit car had broken down again, and didn't get to Meridian until almost midnight. Harold should have been gone an hour ago, but the security office lights were still on. His patrol logs were open on the desk. His coffee mug was still warm, steam curling up from black coffee that smelled like burnt cigarettes. "Harold?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty lobby. Silence. I checked the monitors first. All cameras showed empty hallways, darkened offices, nothing moving except the occasional shadow cast by exterior lighting. But Harold's jacket was draped over his chair, and his reading glasses were folded next to an unfinished crossword puzzle. Harold would never leave without finishing his paperwork. Never. I started searching the building, calling his name. The elevator took me floor by floor. Executive suites, law offices, accounting firms, all empty, all silent. My voice echoed off marble floors and glass walls, but no one answered. On the 15th floor, I heard something that made my blood run cold, and the distant sound of keys jingling. "Harold!" I shouted, relief flooding through me. "Jesus, man, you've scared me." But the jingling stopped. Instantly, like someone had grabbed the keys mid-shake. I stood in that corporate hallway, surrounded by expensive artwork and motivational posters, listening to nothing but the hum of air conditioning. After 10 minutes of silence, I continued my search. That's when I found him in the basement, bone level, slumped over the security desk like he'd fallen asleep on the job. But Harold's skin was waxy pale, his lips blue-tinged, and his right hand was pressed against his chest in a final desperate gesture. Heart attack. Harold had been complaining about chest pains for months, but he'd always brushed off suggestions to see a doctor. "Don't have time for doctors," he'd say. "This building needs protection." I called 911, then sat with Harold's body while I waited. Seemed wrong to leave him alone down there. The man had spent 15 years protecting this place. At least I could do was keep him company until help arrived. The paramedics confirmed what I already knew. Harold had been dead for at least 3 hours. Natural causes, happens all the time. Older guy, high-stress job, poor diet, smoking 2 packs a day. They took the body, police filed their report, and just like that, Harold Kowalski was gone. Management gave me the rest of the week off to process the trauma. Standard procedure when an employee discovers a body. They brought in grief counselors, had me fill out incident reports, assured me they'd find a replacement soon. That should have been the end of Harold's story, but some people don't believe in endings. The first sign came when I returned to work the following Monday. I was doing my 2 a.m. patrol, the same route Harold had walked for 15 years, when I heard them, keys jingling on the floor above me. Not possible. I was alone in the building. The night cleaning crew didn't start until 4 a.m., and they sure as hell didn't carry 50 keys. But there it was, that familiar metallic rhythm echoing through the empty floors. I took the stairs 2 at a time, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, checked every office, every closet, every place someone could hide. Nothing, but I could swear the air smelled like Harold's cologne mixed with cigarette smoke. The second night, I heard footsteps, heavy boots moving through the executive level with methodical precision. The same deliberate pace Harold used during his patrols. I watched the security monitors, cycling through every camera on the 15th floor, empty hallways, darkened offices. Nothing moving, but the footsteps continued, growing closer to my location with each passing minute. That's when I made a discovery that changed everything. I was reviewing the digital patrol logs, trying to figure out if maybe I'd missed something about Harold's final shift, when I noticed an anomaly in the system. According to the computer records, Harold had completed his 2 a.m. patrol on Monday night, but Harold had been dead since the previous Tuesday. I pulled up more records, going back weeks. The pattern was clear. Every night since Harold's death, the system showed him completing his full patrol route. Every door checked, every log entry filled out, every procedure followed to the letter. Someone, or something, was doing Harold's job. I decided to test my theory. The next night, I positioned myself in the lobby with a clear view of the elevator bank. If Harold was somehow still making his rounds, he'd have to use the elevators to reach the upper floors. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the precise time Harold always started his patrol, the elevator in the center bank activated. I watched the floor indicator climb. 3rd floor, 7th floor, 10th floor, 15th. The doors opened with their familiar ding, though I couldn't see inside the car from my position. The elevator stayed on the 15th floor for exactly 12 minutes, the same amount of time Harold's patrol of that level always took. Then it descended to the 12th floor, then the 9th, then the 6th, following Harold's exact route, with Harold's exact timing. But when the elevator returned to the lobby, it was empty. That's when I saw the wet footprints. They led from the elevator, across the marble floor, to the security desk. Size 11 boots, Harold's size, leaving dark impressions that gleamed under the lobby lighting. The prints didn't look like water. They looked like something else. Something that smelled metallic and wrong. I followed the trail with my flashlight, hands shaking. The footprints led behind the security desk, down the hallway to the storage room. The door was standing open, though I'd locked it an hour earlier. Inside, written on the wall in what looked like condensation, were words in Harold's careful handwriting. Patrol, complete. Building, secure. And below that, in fresher writing that was still dripping down the wall, need backup. I ran. Not walked, not jogged. I fucking ran. Up the stairs, through the lobby, out the front doors into the cold Phoenix night. Didn't stop until I reached my car, hands fumbling with keys as I tried to start the engine. But as I sat there, engine running, looking back at the Meridian building, I saw him, Harold's silhouette in the lobby windows, moving with that familiar gait, checking doors, testing locks, making sure everything was secure, doing his job like he'd done every night for 15 years, except Harold was supposed to be 6 feet underground. I called the police from my car, told them about the break-in, the vandalism, the security breach. Officer Martinez responded 20 minutes later, a middle-aged cop who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "So someone wrote on your wall?" he said, reviewing my report. "Harold's dead. He can't be in there." Maybe someone who knew him. Former employee, family member. Grief makes people do strange things. Martinez searched the building with me, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. We found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no writing on any walls. The storage room was clean, dry, untouched. Stress can cause hallucinations, Martinez said, closing his notebook. Finding a body, especially someone you worked with, that's traumatic. Maybe talk to someone, but I knew what I'd seen. Harold was still here, still working, still protecting this building with the same obsessive dedication that had defined his life. The question was, what did he need backup for? I got my answer 3 days later. I was monitoring the cameras around midnight when I noticed something on the external feeds. The building's perimeter cameras showed figures moving in the parking lot. Not unusual. Phoenix gets its share of homeless people, urban explorers, kids looking for trouble, but these figures were moving with purpose. Circling the building, testing doors, looking for ways inside. And there were a lot of them. I counted at least 20 people, all dressed in dark clothing, all moving with coordinated precision. They weren't random intruders. This was organized. That's when I understood Harold's message. He wasn't haunting the building. He was protecting it. From whatever was outside, trying to get in, I called 911, but by the time police arrived, the figures were gone. No trace of them except for footprints in the landscaping and scratch marks around the door frames where they'd tested the locks. Probably just kids. The responding officer said, "Halloween's coming up. Dumbass teenagers think empty office buildings are scary." But I knew better. This wasn't teenage mischief, and Halloween was still 3 months away. The next night, they came back. More of them this time. Maybe 30 figures moving through the darkness around Meridian's perimeter. I watched through the security cameras as they tested every entrance, every window, every possible way inside. They moved wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. Like people who'd learned to walk by watching others, but hadn't quite mastered the rhythm. Too fluid in some ways, too stiff in others, and their faces. When the camera caught them in the right light, their faces were blank. Not masks, not makeup, just empty, like someone had erased their features and forgotten to draw new ones. At 2 a.m., Harold's patrol started as usual, but this time, I could see him on the monitors. Not clearly, he appeared as a faint outline, a shadow that moved through the hallways with familiar purpose. But he was there, checking doors, testing windows, making sure the building was secure, making sure those things outside couldn't get in. I realized I wasn't dealing with a haunting. I was witnessing a war. Harold was the building's immune system, its supernatural security guard, standing watch against something that wanted inside. But what were they? And what did they want? I found out the hard way. The power went out on Thursday night at exactly 1:47 a.m. Not unusual. Phoenix has grid issues during summer heat waves, but the building's backup generators should have kicked in within seconds. They didn't. I was plunged into absolute darkness, emergency lighting failing to activate, my flashlight the only source of illumination in the vast building. And in that darkness, I heard them, footsteps, dozens of them, moving through the building with that same wrong rhythm I'd seen on the cameras. They'd gotten inside. I fumbled for my radio, but it was dead. Tried my cell phone, no signal. Whatever these things were, they'd cut off all communication. That's when I heard Harold's keys jingling, much closer than usual. And for the first time since his death, I heard his voice, Jake. It was barely a whisper, carried on air that smelled like cigarettes and cheap coffee. "They're inside. Need to get you out." "Harold? Jesus Christ, is that really you? Listen carefully. These things, they're not human. They feed on life force, drain it away until there's nothing left but empty shells. Been trying to get into this building for months." The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by sounds that made my skin crawl. Wet breathing, joints popping, whispers in languages I didn't recognize. What do they want? The building's full of people during the day. Hundreds of potential victims trapped in one place. They've been waiting for the right moment to breach the defenses. What defenses? Harold's laugh was bitter. Me. Dead 15 years and still working overtime. The footsteps reached my floor. I could hear them moving through the hallway outside the security office, searching, hunting. My flashlight beam caught glimpses of movement, pale figures that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Harold, I need to get out of here." "Can't. They've sealed the exits. Only way out is through them." "Then what do? We fight." That's when Harold materialized in front of me. Not alive, not exactly, but solid enough to touch. His uniform was pressed, his boots polished, his massive key ring jangling softly at his hip. But his eyes were pure white, like cataracts made of starlight. "Been saving my strength," he said. "Can manifest for maybe 10 minutes. After that," he shrugged. "Well, let's hope 10 minutes is enough." The security office door exploded inward, and they poured through like living shadow. Up close, I could see they weren't human at all. Humanoid, maybe, but wrong in every detail. Too many joints, faces that shifted like water, fingers that ended in points rather than nails. Harold stepped between me and them, keys jingling as he moved. When the first creature reached for me, Harold's hand shot out and grabbed its wrist. The thing screamed, a sound like metal tearing, and began to dissolve where Harold touched it. "Iron," Harold said, holding up his key ring. "Keys are iron. Burns them like acid." He threw me his keys, 50 pieces of cold metal that felt heavier than they should have. "Building blueprints are in the bottom desk drawer. Get to the mechanical room on B2. There's something there I've been saving for an emergency." More creatures poured through the doorway, but Harold was already moving, his ghostly form flickering as he fought. Every touch dissolved parts of their bodies, but there were so many of them, and Harold was fading with each physical contact. "Go!" he shouted. 10 minutes, Jake. Don't waste them." I ran through corridors filled with inhuman shadows. Harold's keys clutched in my fist like a weapon. The creatures followed, but whenever one got too close, I swung the key ring and watched them recoil from the iron. The building blueprints showed what Harold meant. B2 housed more than just HVAC equipment. There was a secondary electrical system, installed during construction but never activated. Emergency lighting that ran on iron core transformers throughout the entire building. Harold had been an electrician before he became a security guard. He knew exactly what he was doing when he took this job. I found the master switch in a locked panel behind the main electrical room. Harold's keys opened it easily. Of course they did. Harold had keys to everything. The switch was massive, industrial grade, with a warning label that read, Emergency Illumination System, Iron Core Transformers, Danger, High Voltage. I threw the switch. The entire building lit up like a Christmas tree. Not normal lighting. This was harsh. White, electric light that came from iron core fixtures Harold had been maintaining for 15 years. Light that carried the metallic tang of iron through every photon. The creatures screamed. All of them, throughout the building. A sound like 1,000 car accidents happening at once. Through the security cameras that had suddenly flickered back to life, I watched them dissolve, their shadow forms unable to withstand the iron-infused light. In 30 seconds, they were gone, but so was Harold. I found him in the lobby, sitting in his usual chair behind the security desk. He looked peaceful, finally at rest, but his form was fading like morning mist. "Harold, it's done," he said, voice barely audible. "Building safe. They won't be back." What were they? Hungry things. Old things. Been trying to find a way into our world for centuries. Buildings like this, full of life, full of energy, are like magnets. "Why didn't you tell me?" Harold smiled, and for a moment, he looked exactly like the man I'd known. "Would you have believed me? Besides, every building needs its guardian. I volunteered for the position. What happens now? Now I clock out. 15 years, 2 months, 6 days. Not bad for a night shift." Harold reached for his time card. Somehow, it was still there on the desk, and punched out with a solid thunk. The sound echoed through the building like a final heartbeat, and then he was gone. The power company restored normal electricity an hour later. Police responded to reports of screaming from the building, but found nothing unusual. I told them it was probably just the emergency lighting system malfunctioning. Old building, weird electrical issues. They bought it. I worked at Meridian for another 3 months after that night. No more strange sounds, no more mysterious footprints, no more ghostly patrols. The building felt different, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. Harold's replacement was a kid named Tommy, fresh out of security training, eager to prove himself. Good kid, but he didn't understand the building like Harold had, didn't treat it with the same respect. "It's just a building," Tommy said when I tried to explain some of Harold's procedures. "Brick and steel and glass. Nothing magical about it." But I noticed things. Lights that burned out faster than they should. Doors that didn't close quite right. Elevators that hesitated between floors. The building was aging without its guardian, losing the careful maintenance that had kept it alive. I put in for a transfer after Tommy found his first dead rat in the basement. Then a second. Then a whole family of them, clustered around the old security desk where Harold used to sit. Buildings remember disrespect, and they don't forgive. I work at a different site now, a mall in Scottsdale where the biggest threat is shoplifters and teenage vandals. Boring work, but safe. Normal. But sometimes I drive past Meridian at night, just to check. The building's still there, still lit up, still housing its boring companies and their boring work. Tommy's doing his job, following his routes, maintaining basic security, but he's not Harold, and the building knows it. Last week, I heard they're having problems at Meridian. Equipment failures, electrical issues, strange sounds at night. The kind of problems that happen when a building stops trusting its caretakers. Tommy called me yesterday, asked if I wanted to come back. worked double shifts until they could find another guard. Said the building felt wrong at night, like something was watching from the shadows. I told him no, some buildings choose their guardians, and some guardians choose to stay, even after their shift ends. Harold had made his choice, sacrificed himself to protect a building full of people who never knew his name, but that protection came with a price. Harold's dedication had awakened something in the building itself, given it a hunger for that same level of care, and without someone willing to pay that price, well, let's just say, Meridian Corporate Center is hiring again. Night security position, good benefits, union job. They've gone through 6 guards in the past month. None of them lasted more than 2 weeks. If you're looking for work, if you see that job posting online, if you're tempted by the overtime pay and the promise of quiet nights, remember Harold's lesson. Some buildings have souls, and some souls demand respect. The question is, are you dedicated enough to earn it? And if this story has made you think twice about taking that night security job, if you've realized that some buildings come with their own history and their own demands, hit that like button. Let me know in the comments if you've ever worked in a place that felt alive, where the walls seemed to watch and remember. Subscribe for more stories about the price of dedication, about the thin line between protection and possession, about the guardians who refuse to abandon their posts. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing about a job isn't the work itself, it's what the job might ask you to become. Sweet dreams. The Deep Sea Fisherman. My first mate Tommy was already growing gills behind his ears when he grabbed my arm with fingers that had stretched into webbed claws and said, "Captain, you need to see what's coming up from the deep. It's beautiful down there, Frank. So much room to swim." The thing is, Tommy had been dead for 6 hours, ever since he'd touched one of the creatures we'd pulled up in our nets. But something from 20,000 feet below was wearing his body now, and it wanted me to join the rest of my crew at the bottom of the Pacific. Let me explain how I learned that some things are better left sleeping on the ocean floor. My name is Frank Delacroix, and I've been fishing these waters for 26 years. Started as deckhand on my father's boat when I was 16, worked my way up to captain by 30. The Mary Catherine is a 70-foot commercial fishing vessel built for deep water work in the Pacific. We run long line operations mostly, sometimes net fishing when the conditions are right. It's honest work, hard work, the kind of job that breaks your body and ages you fast but pays well enough to support a family. My crew consists of 4 men who've been with me for years. Tommy Santos, my first mate, and the best fisherman I've ever worked with. Jake Morrison, deck boss who can read weather patterns like scripture. Eddie Vega, our engineer who keeps the boat running no matter what. And Peter Kim, the youngest of us at 28, but smart as hell and twice as strong as men half his age again. Good men, experienced fishermen who knew these waters as well as I did. Men I trusted with my life on a daily basis. That trust is what nearly got me killed. We were 3 days out from San Pedro when we hit the deep water. GPS showed us positioned over the Mariana Trench, or at least one of its western fingers that dropped down to depths that made your head spin just thinking about them. 25,000 feet of water below our hull, down to places where the pressure would crush a human body in milliseconds. But that's where the fish were. Big schools of tuna and mahi-mahi following currents that rose up from the abyssal depths, carrying nutrients and prey that drew commercial species like magnets. Sonar showing a massive school at 400 feet, Jake called from the wheelhouse. Biggest signature I've seen in years. I checked the fish finder myself. He was right. The display showed a concentration of targets so dense it looked like a solid wall. Fish packed together tighter than I'd ever seen, moving in patterns that seemed almost organized. "Drop the nets," I ordered. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The first haul came up normal, mostly yellowfin tuna, some mahi-mahi, a few smaller species mixed in. Good catch. Nothing unusual except for the quantity. We were pulling in fish like they were fighting to get into our nets. Jesus, Eddie said, watching the deck fill with writhing silver bodies. It's like they want to be caught. Tommy was grinning as he worked the hydraulics. Hell of a thing, Captain. Haven't seen fishing this good since we worked the Grand Banks. But Peter, who was sorting the catch, had stopped smiling. He was crouched next to one of the tuna, his face pale in the deck lights. Captain, he called. You need to see this. The fish he was holding looked normal at first glance. Yellowfin tuna, maybe 60 pounds, fresh caught and still twitching. But when I looked closer, I saw what had spooked Peter. The fish had too many eyes, not just the normal 2. There were 6 of them, arranged in pairs along the sides of its head. Each eye was perfectly formed, perfectly functional. But they were watching us with an intelligence that tuna shouldn't possess. Genetic mutation, Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. Happens sometimes in deep water. Radiation, chemical pollutants, that sort of thing. I wanted to believe that. But as we sorted through the rest of the catch, we found more anomalies. Fish with bioluminescent organs in places they shouldn't have them. Tuna with gills that had been modified somehow, allowing them to process water more efficiently. Mahi-mahi with additional fins that looked like they'd been surgically attached. These aren't mutations, Peter said quietly. Look at the precision, the symmetry. This is too perfect to be random genetic damage. He was right. The modifications were too clean, too purposeful. Like someone, or something, had been experimenting with deep-sea life, improving them for reasons we couldn't understand. Drop the nets again, I decided. Deeper this time. Let's see what else is down there. That's when things started to go wrong. The second haul brought up creatures that didn't belong in any textbook. Fish that looked like they'd been built rather than evolved, with mechanical-looking joints and organs that pulsed with their own light. Some had appendages that looked more like tools than fins. Others had sensory organs that tracked our movements with unsettling focus, and they were all still alive despite being pulled up from crushing depths that should have killed them instantly. This isn't right, Eddie said, backing away from a writhing mass of something that looked like a cross between an octopus and a piece of industrial machinery. These things, they're looking at us. He was right. Every creature in the net was focused on us, studying us with intelligence that made my skin crawl. But more than that, they seemed to be communicating. The bioluminescent organs were flashing in synchronized patterns, complex sequences of light that looked like language, like coded messages being transmitted between the creatures and something else. Captain, Jake called from the wheelhouse. We're getting radio signals. What kind of signals? I don't know. Low frequency, coming from below us, way below us. I climbed up to check the radio equipment. Jake was right. We were receiving transmissions on frequencies that shouldn't exist. The signals were coming from a depth that no human technology could reach, broadcasting patterns that matched the light sequences from the creatures on our deck. How deep? I asked. Jake checked the sonar readings. According to this, 20,000 feet, maybe more. But that's impossible. Nothing down there could generate radio signals. That's when Tommy started screaming. I rushed back to the deck to find him writhing on the deck plates, his hands clamped over his ears. Blood was seeping between his fingers, and his eyes were rolled back so far only the whites showed. Tommy! I grabbed his shoulders, trying to hold him still. What's wrong? But he couldn't hear me. Or maybe he was hearing something else entirely. Something the rest of us couldn't detect. The creatures we'd pulled up were agitated now, their bioluminescence flashing faster, brighter, and through the deck speakers, our radio was picking up more signals. Not just random pulses anymore, but something that sounded almost like voices, deep voices, alien voices, speaking in frequencies that bypassed the ears and went straight into the brain. Tommy's seizure lasted 3 minutes. When it ended, he lay still on the deck, breathing heavily but conscious. His eyes were different, though. Wider, like he'd seen something that had fundamentally changed his understanding of reality. "Tommy," I said carefully, "can you hear me?" He turned to look at me, and I saw that his pupils had dilated to almost perfect circles. When he spoke, his voice was his own, but the cadence was wrong. "It's so deep, Captain. Deeper than the ocean. Deeper than anything we imagined. And it's been waiting so long for us to find it." "What's been waiting?" The voice from below. "It's been calling to the fish, changing them, preparing them, making them ready to carry its message to the surface." Eddie and Peter were backing away from Tommy, but I held my ground. He was my first mate, my friend. Whatever was happening to him, I had to help. "Tommy, look at me. You hit your head when you fell. You're confused." But Tommy smiled with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Too wide, too knowing. "I'm not confused, Frank. I'm enlightened. It showed me things. The cities below, the civilizations that existed before humans crawled out of the shallow water. It's been sleeping for millions of years, but now it's waking up, and it needs us to help." "Help with what?" "The return. The great rising. When the deep places come to the surface and reclaim what was always theirs." I should have turned the boat around right then. Should have radioed the Coast Guard, gotten Tommy to a hospital, reported the strange catches to the marine biology folks, but we were 3 days from shore, and my crew was my responsibility, and I wanted to understand what we'd found. "Drop the nets again," I ordered. "But this time, we go deeper." Jake looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Captain, with respect, that's not a good idea. Tommy needs medical attention, and these things we're pulling up are the discovery of a lifetime," I finished. "When's the last time any fisherman found a completely unknown species? This could make us rich, famous. But first, we need to document everything." It was greed talking. 26 years of hard fishing, barely making ends meet, and suddenly we'd stumbled onto something that could change our lives. I convinced myself we were doing science, advancing human knowledge, but really, I just wanted to see how deep the mystery went. The third haul changed everything. We dropped the nets to 800 feet, deeper than we'd ever fished before. The winch strained against weight that seemed impossible. Our nets felt like they were dragging against the ocean floor itself. When we finally brought up the catch, I understood why. The nets were full of things that had never seen sunlight, creatures from the abyssal depths that shouldn't have been able to survive at surface pressure, but were thriving in our nets like they'd been designed for this exact purpose, and they were organized. The smaller creatures formed defensive perimeters around larger ones. Bioluminescent species provided lighting for those without natural illumination. Some had clearly been modified to serve specific functions: scouts, communicators, workers. "It's an army," Peter whispered. "A fucking army from the deep." But Tommy was laughing. Standing in the middle of the writhing mass of alien sea life, letting the creatures crawl over his boots, his hands, his arms. Some of them were attaching themselves to him, their modified appendages penetrating his skin. "They're beautiful," he said. "Can't you see how beautiful they are? They're showing me their world, Frank. The cities of coral and metal, the vast libraries of genetic knowledge, the sleeping god that dreams at the bottom of everything. Tommy, get away from them." But it was too late. The creatures weren't just attaching to him, they were changing him. I could see his skin taking on a gray, scaly texture where they touched. His breathing was becoming labored, like his lungs were adapting to process water instead of air. "It doesn't hurt," he said, his voice becoming deeper, more resonant. "It's like coming home, like remembering what we were before we forgot how to swim." That's when Jake opened fire. He'd been in the Navy before becoming a fisherman, and he still carried a .45 caliber pistol for shark protection. The first shot took out one of the larger creatures that had wrapped itself around Tommy's leg. The second and third scattered the smaller ones. "Jake, stop!" I shouted. "You'll hit Tommy!" But Jake was beyond reason. He'd seen what the creatures were doing to our first mate, and he wasn't going to let it continue. The creatures reacted to the gunfire with coordinated precision that proved they were operating under some kind of central intelligence. They didn't flee. They attacked. The smaller ones swarmed toward Jake, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. Others began emitting sounds, not the clicking and whistling of normal sea life, but harmonic frequencies that made our teeth ache and our vision blur. And from 20,000 feet below, something answered. The radio speakers exploded with sound. Not voices anymore, but something deeper. A call that bypassed human hearing and spoke directly to the primitive parts of our brains that remembered when our ancestors lived in the ocean. Eddie collapsed first, his hands pressed against his ears, blood streaming from his nose. Peter lasted maybe 30 seconds longer before the psychic pressure dropped him to his knees. But Tommy was singing, harmonizing with the call from below in frequencies that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. His throat was changing, developing additional chambers that allowed him to create the complex tones that seemed to be a form of communication. "Frank," he said during a pause in the cosmic symphony, "you need to listen. Really listen. It's trying to tell us something important." "What?" "The surface world is ending. Pollution, climate change, nuclear weapons. Humanity is destroying the biosphere. But there's another way. A better way. Join with the deep places. Become something more than human." I could feel the pull of his words, the seductive logic of giving up the struggle of surface life for something easier, more natural. The pressure of the call from below was making it hard to think clearly, hard to remember why staying human was important. But then I saw what had happened to Eddie and Peter. They weren't just unconscious. They were changing. Their skin was taking on the same scaly gray texture as Tommy's. Gills were forming behind their ears, opening and closing as they tried to process both air and water. Their fingers were elongating, developing webbing between the digits, and they were breathing water from our deckwash system, from the overflow of our catch tanks. They were lying in pools of seawater, their modified gills extracting oxygen while their lungs shut down. "They're adapting," Tommy said with pride, "becoming what they need to become. What we all need to become. They're dying. No, Frank. They're evolving, being improved, made ready for the world that's coming." That's when I realized the truth. Whatever was calling from the deep wasn't trying to communicate with us. It was trying to convert us, turn us into something that could survive in the ocean depths, something that could serve its purposes in the surface world. "The nets," I said. "We have to get these things back in the water." Tommy's expression changed. For the first time since his transformation began, he looked genuinely alarmed. "You can't do that, Frank. They're here for a purpose. They're the advanced scouts, the first wave. If you send them back now, you'll delay the great work." "What great work?" "The rising. When the sleeping god wakes fully and brings the deep places to the surface. When the ocean reclaims the land and everything returns to the way it was before humans poisoned the world." I looked around the deck at the writhing mass of creatures, at my transformed crew members, at the madness that had taken hold of my boat, and I made a decision that probably saved my life. I grabbed the emergency flare gun and aimed it at the fuel tank. "Tommy, get away from those things. That's an order. But Tommy just smiled with teeth that were becoming pointed, carnivorous. "You can't stop it, Frank. It's already begun. Look at the horizon." I glanced toward the western horizon and felt my blood turn to ice. The ocean was rising, not a wave, not a swell. The actual sea level was increasing. Water that had been 20,000 feet down was somehow pushing upward, bringing with it things that had never been meant to see daylight. Massive shadows moved beneath the surface. Things the size of skyscrapers, or maybe bigger. Ancient architectures built from materials that weren't quite stone, weren't quite metal. Cities that had been sleeping on the ocean floor since before human civilization began. And at the center of it all, something that made my sanity try to shut down rather than process what I was seeing. A god. Or something so far beyond human understanding that calling it a god was the only way my mind could cope with its existence. Tentacles that stretched for miles. Eyes that reflected the light of distant stars. A consciousness so vast that it used entire species as sensory organs. It was waking up. And when it finished waking up, the surface world was going to become an extension of the deep ocean. Beautiful, isn't it? Tommy said, his voice now carrying harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. The return of the true masters of Earth. Humanity had its chance, Frank. We squandered it. Now it's time for something better. That's when Eddie and Peter sat up. Their transformation was complete. Gray skin, functional gills, elongated limbs, perfectly adapted for aquatic life. But they were still wearing human faces, still speaking with human voices. "Captain," Eddie said, his voice bubbling through water-adapted vocal cords. "Join us. The pressure down there is incredible. No weight, no gravity, no limits, just the endless deep and the songs of the old ones." "Frank," Peter added, reaching toward me with webbed fingers. "Don't fight it. Let yourself become what you were always meant to be." They were standing now, moving with the fluid grace of born swimmers. And they were surrounding me, cutting off my escape routes. "The flare gun won't work," Tommy said. "Fire can't burn underwater, and soon, everything will be underwater." He was right. I could see the ocean level continuing to rise, impossibly fast. Our boat was being lifted higher and higher as the sea floor itself seemed to be pushing upward, but I still had one advantage. I was still human, still thinking with a surface dweller's logic. I didn't aim the flare gun at the fuel tank. I aimed it at the radio equipment. The emergency flare exploded in a shower of sparks and flame, destroying our communications array and, more importantly, severing our connection to the signals from below. The effect was immediate. The creatures on our deck began writhing in confusion, their coordinated behavior dissolving into chaos. The harmonic frequencies stopped, leaving sudden, blessed silence. And my crew started screaming. The psychic connection that had been sustaining their transformation was broken. Without the constant signal from the deep, their bodies began rejecting the alien modifications. Gills sealed shut, forcing them to breathe air again. Webbed fingers separated back into individual digits. Scales sloughed off like dead skin, but the process was agony. I watched 3 men I'd known for years convulse on the deck as their bodies fought to return to human form. Tommy lasted the longest. His connection to the deep had been stronger, more complete. But even he couldn't maintain the transformation without the psychic link. "Frank," he gasped as his gills sealed shut. "What have you done?" It was so beautiful, so perfect. Then he passed out. I grabbed the medical kit and started working on my crew. Eddie was breathing normally again, but his pulse was weak. Peter had stopped convulsing, but his body temperature was dangerously low. Tommy was stable but unconscious, and around us, the ocean was returning to normal levels. The rising water was sinking back to its natural depth. taking the ancient cities and the sleeping god with it, but I knew it wasn't over. The flare had only broken our connection temporarily. Down in the deep, something vast and patient was still waking up, and next time, it would be better prepared. I got the backup radio working and called for Coast Guard assistance. Told them we'd had a medical emergency, crew members overcome by toxic gas from a bad catch. They responded within 6 hours, evacuating my men to the nearest hospital. The official report listed it as severe decompression sickness, combined with nitrogen narcosis, occupational hazard in deep water fishing. The strange creatures we'd caught were classified as previously unknown deep-sea species, rare but not unprecedented. My crew recovered physically, but none of them remembered what had happened after Tommy's first seizure. The doctor said selective amnesia was common in cases of severe neurological trauma. I didn't correct them. I sold the boat a month later and moved inland. Took a job managing a warehouse in Arizona, as far from the ocean as I could get. But I still monitor marine biology reports, oceanographic surveys, anything that might indicate unusual activity in the deep water, because sometimes, late at night when I'm trying to sleep, I can still hear it, the call from below, harmonic frequencies that bypass human hearing and speak directly to the part of our brains that remembers when our ancestors lived in the sea, promising a return to something older, deeper, more natural than the surface world. And I know that someday, probably soon, it's going to succeed. The ocean covers 70% of our planet's surface. We've explored less than 5% of it. We have no idea what's really down there in the deep places, in the trenches that go down to the molten heart of the world. But something down there knows about us, has been watching us, studying us, preparing for the day when the surface world becomes just another part of its domain. So here's what I need you to understand. If you work on the ocean, if you fish the deep waters, if you've ever pulled up a catch that didn't look quite right, pay attention to the details. Are the fish behaving normally? Are they watching you with more intelligence than they should have? Can you hear sounds that seem to come from impossible depths? And most importantly, if you start hearing voices from below, if the call of the deep starts to make sense, if joining something vast and ancient begins to seem like a good idea, get to shore immediately. Get as far inland as you can. Because once you hear the call clearly, once you understand what it's offering, you might not want to resist anymore. The ocean is waking up. And when it finishes waking up, the distinction between sea and land is going to become irrelevant. And if this story has made you think twice about that deep-sea fishing trip, if you've started wondering what else might be calling from the depths, hit that like button. Let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced something strange on the water, something that made the ocean feel alive and aware. Subscribe for more stories about the things that sleep in deep places, about the price of exploring where humans weren't meant to go, about the ancient intelligences that remember when the world was young. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing about fishing isn't the weather or the equipment or the isolation. It's what might be fishing for you in return. Sweet dreams.